Welcome in, everyone. There she is. All right. Appreciate you. Welcome to Deservingly You. I'm John Briggs. If you haven't already, please hit that like button, subscribe, share if you find value. And
We haven't even started yet. How do you know if there's any value added?
well,
we haven't even started yet. How do you know if there's any value?
in the show, in the show.
Okay, but let's let them see a little bit before we start telling them to like and share and all of that fun stuff. Let's see if we bring the goods.
All right. We'll say that again later. Obviously, at the end, toward the end.
That's so. I just had to give you a bad time.
I know. If I don't say it right away, I always forget later on.
I doubt it.
It seems to go that way.
I would disagree. You are really good at remembering that, though, and also like interacting with our chat and stuff like that. So I really appreciate it. And so I see that we've got John on here. Looks like we've got a couple of other people that are watching us as well. So welcome. We'll go ahead and dive in. Welcome to Deservingly You. I'm Shannon Avery Briggs. And this is my husband, John.
Oh, hi. Yep. Well, I already introduced myself. The first thing was right off. So
we're both former Jehovah's Witnesses, and we're certified transformational resilience coaches. We're also the co-founders of the Exit Generation, and this is a movement and community that focuses on what happens right after high control and how we begin building our lives that are genuinely our own. And if you've been with us over the last several weeks, we've spent a lot of time in phase 2 talking about grief and what happens when, one of those waves hit, or what our sadness can tell us, even how we can tell our stories without having it re-traumatize us, and how we begin finding our way back after something might knock us off our balance. And so we finished our first round of talking about phase 2 in that allowing the grief. And now we're going to be moving on to phase 3 of exit paths. And that's section is called Tending the Roots.
And we're starting somewhere that may surprise you, because when we think about rebuilding after leaving, we tried to think about the big thing, the big stuff, right? Who am I now? What do I believe? Where do I belong? What do I want my life to become? These huge things, right?
Yep. And so before we try to answer all of that, we actually want to take a look at something much more ordinary, what we're calling the basics, our rest, our food, our movement, the quiet, the connection. Because tonight isn't about telling you to drink more water or take more walks. It's about what can happen when we begin noticing what we need and listening to ourselves and then responding to what we hear. Now, it's those small moments that can become some of our earliest opportunities to practice something that we're going to talk a lot about in this phase, and that's self-trust and building that up. And ultimately learning how to live a life more self-led. And, so this is just also kind of piggybacking on when John and I say, pay attention. Where do you feel this in your body? And what do you notice? And so we're just building on that more and more. And we've got Linda here tonight too, Johnny.
Hi, Linda. Hi, everyone.
So if you've been with us before since the beginning, or that you're joining us for the very first time, we are so glad that you're here. One thing that makes these conversations a little different is that our focus is on us. We're not focusing on the organization or the system or the people that we left. There are those places to examine what happened, what was taught, what was wrong, and those conversations are important. But here in this environment, we're much more interested in another question. What do we do with our lives now?
right? How do we rebuild? How do we learn what works for us now? And how do we make our own choices and begin creating lives that actually feel like ours? Okay, and we want to create room to think, question, explore, and decide for yourself what actually works for you. Okay, so take what connects with you tonight, leave what doesn't, and stay curious about the things that make you think. Please grab a notebook, pad, or your journal and write down anything that might stand out or questions you may arise.
Yep.
And we appreciate you like always.
Yep. We have Ruby joining us tonight too.
Awesome.
So tonight, that focus on ourselves becomes especially important. We're going to be going to look at some of those very ordinary parts of everyday life and how they can become the first places that we begin practicing listening to and actually trusting ourselves again. So tonight, what we're focusing on is something really simple. What are we building now? And maybe even more importantly, what does that life need? What does our life need underneath all of that? Because we can have all kinds of ideas about the life that we want to create, or we may not know what life we want to create. There's that too. But either way, we have to start discovering what actually helps our life work. What supports us, what gives us energy, what gives us room to grow. And John, when I hear the question, when you hear the question, what actually helps your life work? What comes up for you?
I think about how that can be different for each individual. For me, there are things that I know make a difference in how I show up in my day. Okay, how much rest I've gotten, whether I've had some time to myself, whether I've moved around, got some exercise, whatever that looks like at any given time. Whether you and I have had some time together, had an opportunity to interact, and even whether I've had some fun. Okay. And none of those things sound real big, right? But when several of them are missing, it stands out, and I start to notice something, something off.
Yeah, absolutely. And even before the show started, we actually took some time to kind of prep ourselves and to move our body a little bit, and so that we could be more prepared and stuff. And that's part of what we're going to get into tonight. And we're not, the thing is that this isn't about asking you to design your entire future in an hour, because that isn't going to happen. We're actually asking something a lot closer, is what helps you to live well.
Yeah, I like that question because there's no some universal answer. Just this doesn't exist. Maybe you need more quiet than I do, okay? Or maybe I need more movement than you do. Maybe connection fills one person up, and another person just needs some time alone. And the interesting part is starting to notice your own answer.
Yeah. Yep. So we're going to discuss some pretty important things in phase 3. We're going to start being curious and looking at identity and just a little bit of purpose. We're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about direction. We're going to be talking about meaning. But before we start talking about everything we want to grow, we want to look at actually what can help support that growth.
Yeah. So, and this is where we are in the exit paths. So we moved into phase 3, tend the roots. And now I want to point out something about this roadmap here that you see on this slide. Moving into phase 3 doesn't mean phase 1 and phase 2 are finished, okay? And we never go back there. Life doesn't work out that neatly, does it? So there may be things that we're waking up to. Grief can still show up. Anger can still rear its ugly head, right? That's something that can happen 6 months from now that sends us right back into something we thought we had already processed and put behind us.
Yeah. This is definitely not a staircase, where you complete one level and you unlock the next one. We've talked before, these phases can overlap and we absolutely can move in between them. But what changes is where we're putting more of our attention. And so right now we're going to be putting more attention on, like, where do I want to grow? Not just what do I want to get past, and not just what do I want less of, but what do I want more of in my life?
And I really like the line that we put on this slide. We're not just rebuilding what was lost, we're discovering what helps us come alive. All right, because rebuilding doesn't have to mean reacting or recreating some version of the life that we had prior. Okay, we get to discover new things. Maybe I discover I really value quiet time. Okay, or that I need some more time outside. Or I discover that I like doing things I never gave myself time, to try in the past, before. Maybe certain relationships I discover just bring out in me what I want more of. Okay, that's experimentation in this phase. Yeah.
This phase, actually, I get really excited about because of the opportunities that can present. And there's two words. You said experimentation, and I want to expand on that. There's two words that I absolutely love in this, and I personally have found really matter a lot here, and that's curiosity and experimenting. Because curiosity lets me ask questions without already needing to know the answer. What happens if I spend more time outside? And that could mean anything. It could be things like, I'm going to drink my coffee on the patio in the morning. That could be part of being outside. Or even starting to take a walk after dinner. Or maybe I want to get my fingers into the dirt and actually plant something. Probably not, because that's not one of my things, but maybe one of these days I might try it. Or I may discover that I like hiking. And right now I do like, lower hikes. I don't like John and I have done hikes in the past where they were pretty difficult. You needed the sticks in order to get up some of those trails. And I do like that. And now that we're in Arizona, I've started trying to reach out to a few people who do like to hike so that we can experiment with some of at least for right now, some of the easier hikes. But maybe too, one of the things I love about Arizona is not as many streetlights. And so we can go outside at night and those stars are just out there, just amazing. That just shining brightly in our backyard. We didn't have that in Seattle because there was a lot of, what do they call that? Light noise or something like that, where it's like, there's so many lights, you just can't see the sky. So that's one of the things I absolutely love about being here. And some of the things too is like when I had to go pick up John in Salt Lake City, jumping the dogs in the car and we got to go someplace new. I didn't have to decide right, at that moment that I'm an outdoors person. I can just start getting curious. And experimenting lets me try something without turning it into a commitment about who I truly am. Maybe it's a pottery class or a cooking class, or I have gone to a few paint and sips, and that's a lot of fun. Right now there's, the Liberati does a book club, and they're actually doing a book that was written by, is it Tony DeShane, who who was an XJW, that I can't remember the title of the book. Sorry, you'd have to check in the Liberati, but they're going to be having that. So having those new types of conversations that we didn't have a tendency to either have time for, or we didn't do it, you know? And so just finding some different things that we can do. You know, we may even want to learn an instrument. You know, I ended up going to a movie last night with a bunch of friends. And so maybe I try something and discover that I hate it. You know, I was surprised. For example, the very first time I tried sushi, I was expecting to hate it, and I actually really did like it. But there's other things too. I don't like places that are really loud and with a bunch of disruptive people and stuff. So I'm more of those cozy places.
Yeah, because now you know something that you didn't know before, right? Experimenting means I don't have to be good at it, okay? It's new, it's unfamiliar, and I don't have to keep doing it. And I certainly don't have to turn it into some new identity, right? Or place any meaning to it. I'm gathering information about me and myself, okay, as we move through this. And we can do the same thing with what we want more of in our lives, okay? Maybe we want more peace, more adventure, more productivity, more meaningful conversations, more play, just more people around my table, maybe a certain type, like Shannon was saying, with those activities that she mentioned, whatever that looks like for you.
Or maybe even fewer people. And maybe we want like those deeper conversations with the people that are there. I know that I love having more music around my house, and moments where, I can have those moments where I can catch myself thinking, I really like my life right now. And that's one of the things, like I said, that I absolutely love about this phase. This phase, we're not required to already know what helps us come alive. We actually get to discover it.
Yeah. And the way we do discover it is by living, right? Living some of it, and trying things, paying attention, keeping what works, and getting rid of what is not for you. Letting and just and then knowing and being aware and just listening to your body.
Yep. And so that curiosity instead of certainty, and experimenting instead of getting it right. John says that he loves to read books. I'm curious, John, if you've ever done any book club, and seen if you seen what other people. That's part of the fun of it, is being able to see what other people identified in the book. So I can't hardly wait. I know the thing that's coming up in my mind with this book, and I'm just getting started with it. So I can't wait to hear what other people share with this book club that we're going to be doing in the Liberati. But one of the things too with this, we start learning more about the person in the mirror who is actually living this life right now. And so that's the energy that I want going into the rest of phase 3. We get to try things, we get to notice, we get to adjust, try again, and start discovering who we are, and identifying what brings that energy in our life and what helps me feel engaged and helps me come alive.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. But when you look at everything that we want to rebuild, it can also start feeling like a pretty big project, and can be overwhelming also.
Yep. So that's why we want to touch on that.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So now, after everything we just said, this can sound really exciting, right? We get to explore, we get to experiment, we get to figure out what we want, and then look at questions like what you see there on the slide. Who am I now? What do I want? Well, what do I believe, right? Or where do I belong? Who do I trust? These are huge, life-changing questions. especially once you figure it out and get to the bottom of it, or even if you don't, suddenly it's like, okay, that's a lot.
Yep. Yeah, they are definitely. And when we start looking at that kind of things, one of the things that can end up happening is that we can start putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to answer them. And so I think there can be this feeling that now I absolutely have to rebuild my life right now under this pressure, and even that word rebuilding can make it sound like it's this huge project. Like, I need a plan. I need to know exactly where I'm going. I need to be figuring myself out and know, what I want my whole new life to look like. And, I'm supposed to be able to sit down and figure all of this out, who I am, and if I use myself, who is Shannon right now? What are my values? What do I believe? Who are my people? And what am I going to do with the rest of my life? That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, really, you may not know yet. I think that's important to say again. You may not know yet. Okay. You may not know what you believe. You may not know where you belong. And you may have suddenly, or you may absolutely have no idea what you want. Okay. And some days, questions like, who am I now, might be answered with, I have no freaking clue. Okay. And that's okay. And to be honest, I'm not sure there's a point where you stop trying, or where you stop figuring it out, because life just keeps changing, right, and evolving over time. And we change. What matters to us changes, and we want changes, don't we, in order to move forward and grow.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like some of the training that John and I have been through, one of the things that he was like, if that stops, if you stop having the curiosity and you stop growing, guess what? You're not living, and you're not going to be expanding. And he was joking and laughing. He's like, if you're not doing that, if you're not living, you're dead. So we want to be able to expand and to learn. And so it actually fits with what we're talking about with experimenting. We don't have to figure out who we are just yet and then go live that life. Maybe part of how you figure out who you are is actually by living it. It's by trying things, meeting different people. And I know that's scary, meeting new people, especially when we were told for so many years they were so dangerous. It can be really, really scary, and even going to different places. But when we start noticing and really paying attention and becoming present, with what we enjoy and noticing what we don't, that's what we want more of. That's actually one of the things that I've noticed the most about healthy people that I've met outside of the system. They actually do stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I also think that takes some pressure off some of these questions. There doesn't have to be some final version of you that you're trying to uncover. Okay. You're allowed to keep learning. You're allowed to change your mind, allowed to discover something about yourself that will surprise you, in essence. Yeah.
So I want you to look at this for a minute. Up towards the top, we have, some of those things that often coming out of the high control environment that we are genuinely looking for after our life has completely been turned upside down. We want that confidence. We want that sense of purpose. We want relationships and identity, direction, and meaning. Things that we want to have strength in, as well as see grow. But then if we look towards the bottom of the slide, we've got sleep, movement, rest, things like sunlight and nourishment, connection, safety, play, and enjoyment. And sometimes we can get so focused on what the hell do I do now that we don't pay attention to what's happening down in the roots area.
Yeah, and especially when you've just come out, you may not be thinking about any of those things as something that you need to pay attention to. You may be just trying to figure out what life looks like now. Okay, maybe your sleep is completely off. Maybe you're spending hours researching or watching videos, trying to figure it out. Maybe you're alone a lot more than you used to be, or maybe you just suddenly have time that used to be filled up for you. Okay, and you just honestly don't know what to do with it yet.
Yeah, and I think that that's partly why these things can be so easy to dismiss. But I like the way that this picture shows it. You know, you don't walk past a tree and think typically what's happening underneath the ground. You know, we see a tree, you know, that it's growing. We may see the branches or the leaves, or if it's a fruit tree, we might see the fruit. But there is this whole entire system underneath of it that you don't see. And if that system isn't getting what it needs, eventually you're probably going to see it above the ground as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at some of these things here. You know, if I'm not sleeping well for a while, that's gonna, affect me. If I haven't had much connection with people, that's gonna affect me as well. If everything's been serious and there hasn't been any enjoyment, right, or play in my life, that's gonna affect me as well. And not because of any of those things, explains everything's going to go at. That's going to explain everything that's going on in my life, all right? But they're part of what I'm bringing with me in it, in everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and trust me, if John doesn't get his sleep, it affects me too. And so one of the things I do want to emphasize, here too, is that play and enjoyment. Just here for a second, because those are really, really easy ones to leave off a list like this. We tend to think about what a person needs to function, that sleep, food, rest, safety. But I personally don't want to just function. I want to be able to enjoy being alive. And I want things that make me laugh, which is why I've got Johnny in my life partly too. But and I also want things that I can look forward to. And those moments that are fun for absolutely no productive reason. Those are the things that belong in the foundation of our lives.
I think that's important because, support isn't only about keeping yourself from falling apart. It can also be about giving yourself enough of what makes life feel good.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious if anybody wants to put in the chat which of the conditions that we should be tending to, which one's the most difficult for you? I'd love to see that in the chat. None of us is going to have all of these perfectly tended to at all time. This isn't what this picture is sharing here. It's really just asking us to notice, what am I trying to grow? And what am I giving myself to grow it with? These are the things that underneath everything may look really, really basic, but what we have found personally in our experience is that they're not basic at all. We believe it or not, like some of the training that John and I went through, they did training like this, so this is something that everybody needs to pay attention to. These were some of the things that my doctor had me start on, with the cancer journey. And at the time, when you hear cancer, you're thinking about the big things. You're thinking about the treatment, the survival. You're thinking about what the heck is happening next. And yet some of the conversations were about things that seemed incredibly ordinary, making sure that I get enough sleep, making sure that, in order to get that, I might need a supplement to help me. What I was putting into my body. I better know whose backyard that chicken is coming from. I'm not kidding. He used that phrase, and making sure that I was getting outside. And, I needed to be able to give my body the best conditions that supported what I was trying to do overall. And nobody was suggesting either that those things magically fixed everything, but they mattered.
Yeah, I think that's the connection here. We can have something enormous, that's happening in our lives, and assume that means the things that support us have to be enormous also. Okay, they don't always have to be. Yeah, but they just stack.
Yep. And that was something that I had already learned in one really significant part of my life, and I think I had to learn it again here. So Linda came back and said that sunlight is actually one of the biggest areas that she's challenged with in getting out. And John said, I'm thinking that he meant movement instead of moment. But I remember, like, when John broke his back, one of the things that we did immediately when he got home and could actually walk a little bit better without the walker. You could walk with the sticks instead of the walker. And so we would put him outside even for 10 minutes, so that he could be in the sunlight and he could also have his bare feet in the grass and on the ground. And it helped immensely. It took down his pain, as well as it'll, that vitamin D can help boost our mood. And I'll admit, like John, movement is one of those that I was really good at during the cancer journey. I kind of faded off, and so that's one of those things that I want to start focusing on as well. But even just 10 minutes, I've got a vibration plate here that I'll even get on that, and that will help me feel better.
I struggle with that too, and I'm a truck driver. That's my day job right now, and so I'll drive for 7 to 8 hours at a time at a stretch, and then when I do get out of the truck, I'm not moving for very long. Not compared to the hours I was driving. So that's definitely something for me to think about. All right, so here we are. Here's another reason we wanted to spend some time on this. Some of us may look at that list and think sleep, rest, food, sunlight. Okay, those are just the basics.
Yep, and that's the point. I mentioned the cancer journey a minute ago, and the one thing that I learned during that time was actually that the basics weren't going to answer that big question. Like I was saying, that stuff that I was facing, getting outside wasn't going to make the cancer disappear, and getting enough sleep wasn't going to make the decisions that I had to make. It wasn't going to make them go away. Eating well wasn't going to guarantee a specific outcome, but those things could help strengthen me in the parts of that journey that were going to be difficult. And that changed how I looked at them. They weren't little things anymore. They actually became part of how I supported myself through something really big. And it actually helped me too. There's so many people that have asked, when I tell them that I was a cancer survivor, they would say, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'd be like, no, it was actually one of the coolest experiences of my life. And part of it was because of these types of things that I started putting into my world.
Yeah, and I think that some of us may have almost the opposite experience, waking up and coming out of a high control environment, because for a long time, a lot of those basics were pretty easy to push through, right? You're tired, you still have the meeting, right? You've worked all week and you're exhausted Saturday morning, there's service, right? Field service. it's a 3-day convention and you're wiped out, you get up and do it again tomorrow anyway. Okay. You don't necessarily stop and ask what you need. You learn that you can just push through it.
Yeah. And so then we get, after enough years of doing that, we actually can stop recognizing those things as important information. We're tired doesn't necessarily mean that we should rest. And when we get overwhelmed, we may not slow down. We can see it too. We can see the people that may be in the organization that end up having that burnout and stuff. That's signs of not being taking care of themselves this way. The other thing too is making sure that you're recognizing when we need some fun. And that one especially, a lot of times won't even register as something that we need. And so we may have all gotten really, really good at overriding all of those types of things.
Exactly. And then you come out and nobody is necessarily telling you to push through anymore, but you may still do it, okay? Because that's the programming.
Yeah. And even with that, we don't even realize that we're doing it, because if I've spent years treating those things as secondary, why in the world would I suddenly recognize how important they are just because my circumstances changed? So part of this phase may be even much simpler than what we think. It's not about immediately changing everything. That's one of the things we want to make sure. It's an invitation to just learning to notice again. And that was actually one of the things that I got in the cancer journey as well. My doctor invited me to become very observant, observant about conversations, observant about what was going on in my life, observe when I was tired. Why was I tired? Observe, all sorts of different things. I haven't gone outside for 3 days, so I haven't seen the sun, or being able to have that fun. The other thing too, one of them that can be really, really a big challenge, and I fight with this too, especially, is recognizing when I need quiet time. All of these little pieces of information that we can take in and learn about ourselves.
Yeah. And if you spent a long time pushing past, right, these things, noticing them may actually be a pretty big deal, okay? Because before I can do anything about what I need, I have to recognize that I need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where it can get interesting too, because even once we start recognizing some of these things, responding to them may not become natural, because once again, it might be what we're that pattern that we've been trained in. We can recognize that I'm exhausted, but we still keep going, and that I've had enough, but I'm going to do one more thing. I'm guilty. I do that often. I've got an afternoon with absolutely nothing on my calendar, and somehow I feel uncomfortable, doing nothing.
Yeah. And some of that is probably just habit, right? And we get really good at pushing through, okay? You did what you needed to be done, regardless of how tired you were, whether you felt like it or not, or whether you really had anything left to give. And you can carry that way of functioning with you, as time goes on. It just sticks.
Yeah.
The brain, yeah. Anyway.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say the brain always gravitates towards what's familiar, right? So becoming aware of that and just working in a new habits, new routine, that then those new things become familiar. It's a process.
Yeah, it's kind of like that structure piece,
Yeah.
And this doesn't get talked about enough. When your life has been highly structured for a very long time, you being the one, the one having control of your own time now, all of a sudden, that definitely takes some time getting used to.
Especially weekends. All of a sudden there can be these big open spaces where something, used to be, and at first, that can feel like a big deal. And but it can also feel strange, and you haven't necessarily had a lot of practice creating a rhythm simply because it works for you.
Yeah. And then meanwhile, you're still dealing with everything else that comes with that rebuilding. So the small stuff can end up getting pushed down the list. Oh, I don't need to rest. I don't really need to work about, making sure that I've got healthy food. Getting out in the sunshine, it can wait. I can do it later, and that definitely fun. I don't deserve to have fun yet because I haven't done enough and gotten all the things done that I wanted to. So fun can definitely wait. And then pretty soon we're doing exactly what we were talking about. We're overriding ourselves again.
Yeah, except now nobody else is asking us to. Okay, and I think that's worth a second look. Okay, and getting to notice that, because leaving the environment doesn't automatically change every way that we learn to operate, inside it. Some of that is simply learning a different way to live in our own lives.
And I think that actually that point where you talked about, leaving that environment doesn't automatically change, the way that we operate and stuff. That's very fascinating, especially as you start, if you get really, really curious and geeky like us, you start seeing some of these patterns and you are really blown away with how you can see them within those who have left the organization, but yet these patterns still show up. And so that's what really can help us also to start trusting ourselves and to start learning how to live that self-led life, is being able to recognize those patterns so that we can make adjustments. So, okay, so rather than talking about this, I want us to try something. So wherever you're at right now, just check in with your body for a second. We're not going to meditate or anything like that. You don't need to close your eyes, but I just want you to notice. Maybe unclench your jaw. I know that's one of the things that I have a tendency to do, is really tighten my jaw, or are your shoulders up, up by your ears, or so do you need to kind of let them go? You may want to shift in your chair. Maybe take a drink if there's one next to you. Take one good breath, because one of the things that we have a tendency to do is breathe really, really shallow. So all the way down to your belly button.
That's it. Nothing profound, right? And but maybe you just noticed something that you hadn't noticed 30 seconds ago, right? And that is really what this can be about. Okay, just listen, notice, and respond. Doesn't need to be perfect, just a little more often.
Yeah, so I'm curious if anybody did that with us. What was there anything that you guys noticed about you? Sometimes too, that when we say listen, notice, respond, that respond, you might go, but sometimes responding can be something really, really simple. You just notice that you're tired. And so you actually let yourself stop.
Which sounds simple, right? Except some of us are really good at just stopping only when we're completely out of gas. And so that listen, notice, respond turns into reacting instead of responding, in a certain way. Yeah.
I don't know anything about that. Not at all.
No, not you.
Yeah. So far nobody's put anything about whether they noticed anything about, any when we did that little mini check-in. Nobody's shared anything. What did you, before we jump into this, Johnny, when we did that, what did you notice?
That I need to take deeper breaths. I'm breathing kind of shallow.
Yeah.
Because of certain things, maybe physical pain, little anxiety, but just something that I wasn't focusing on, and I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
At the time.
I definitely, my jaw, I'm a clencher. I'm a big clencher. John says he's more relaxed than ever. And Linda's more relaxed than before too. You mean before before we did that little mini exercise? Is that what you mean when you say that you're relaxed before? Okay, so you're more relaxed after we did that. Then okay, that's good. All right, well, let's dive a little bit deeper into some of these areas.
All right, so here there really is a difference between choosing to rest and finally stopping because you have nothing left, right? And I think a lot of us know that second one pretty well, that we're just not having anything left. You keep going. You get one more thing done. You then one more thing. And eventually your body basically says, okay, we're done here.
Yeah, I've had to learn, that rest doesn't have to come after the end of exhaustion. And I don't have to completely wear myself out before I've done enough to deserve sitting down. And there's my word deserving again, right? That it's interesting because I think sometimes we really do treat rest as if it's a reward instead of a need. I worked hard enough today. I got enough done. I was productive. Now I can rest. It doesn't have to be that way. Although I like this guy's hammock. I would love to be able to have of course it gets a little hot here in Arizona, so it may not be as much fun in Arizona here to have one, but
I think in the mornings it might be nice, especially in, like January. But yeah, I hear you there. The problem with that is there's always something else that you can do. Okay. The house is never completely done. Work is never over. And there's always another email, another project, something else to do. But so if everything has to be finished before you rest, then good luck with that. Yeah, because it's never going to be done.
yeah.
The work that is.
Yeah. And so like I was saying before, rest isn't a reward. Rest is actually something I need, not something that I have to earn. So it doesn't mean that I abandon my responsibilities every time that I feel tired. Rest gets to be one of those things that I consider when I'm deciding what I need.
Yeah, and it can look different, right? Also, rest doesn't always mean going to sleep. Sometimes it's sitting outside, for 20 minutes or watching something, some dumb cat video on the internet that makes you laugh or whatever. Putting your phone down, not making any plans, having just a little bit slower of a morning, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Linda said something about sunlight. That's one of the things. So could you imagine, considering getting some sunlight as part of rest? Or we could decide that something really can't wait until tomorrow. I think that one has been a big one for me because most things that we do actually can. And so when I start treating rest as part of taking care of myself, instead of it being a reward for everything that gets done, then I don't have to wait until I'm completely empty to actually give myself that. I'm curious if this is resonating with folks, and if there's some like new ideas with it, and or if it's just same old. Curious. And Riley's being a little bit obnoxious tonight too. So I'm trying to keep him entertained as we're doing this. So another thing that are a couple of areas that we want to think about are movement and food. You know, they can make things way more complicated than they need to be. You know, because the minute that we say movement, it can turn into, oh my gosh, this is exercise. You know, and exercise can turn into, well, how often, how long, how many steps, how many calories? Am I going to be doing enough?
Right. So I have to join a gym. And suddenly we got another program, right, to follow.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you know, that's really not where we're going with this. Movement can be walking the dog. It can be stretching because your back is tight. I'm always telling Johnny, inverted V hang, inverted V hang. You know, we might put music on while we're cleaning the house, you know, or, you know, if we do enjoy working in the yard, that can be something. Even getting up and moving away from the computer and, you know, walking back and forth in the house because you've been sitting there way too long. It can even be simply noticing that your body feels better when it does move. And sometimes for me, it's like getting up and throwing the ball to the dogs down the hallway and letting them chase it.
Exactly. And I think the same thing applies to food. Okay, this doesn't have to become another set of rules about what you should and shouldn't eat. You can start paying attention to your own experience, though. Okay, maybe you notice you feel better when you actually eat breakfast. Okay, maybe certain foods give you more energy. Maybe you realize you've been so wrapped up in everything that you've actually forgotten to eat until later in the day. Okay, and that's all just information and things, again, to notice, right, and take note of.
Yeah. So this actually reminds me of one of my favorite personal experiences that I've had in regards to food. So with on my marriage before John, we were McDonald's addicts. His family actually worked for McDonald's, so we were always getting McDonald's. But one of the things I wanted to lose weight and stuff after we split up, and so one of the things that I started paying attention to was actually I had that aha moment that I'm like, I don't like the way my tongue feels after I eat McDonald's French fries, because to me it felt like my tongue was coated with Crisco. And so just paying attention to that made me go, you know what? I don't want to eat that anymore. So this is where, too, that self-trust piece can start showing up again. You know, I can experiment. I can notice how something feels, like the Crisco tongue. I can decide if I want more or less of it. I didn't want more of the Crisco tongue, you know, and it can make a difference. I can make a different choice tomorrow if I want to.
Yeah, right. And again, without turning it into something that you have to get, you know, perfectly right.
Yeah, because this isn't about correcting your body. It's about caring for the body that you have right now. Just caring for it, just noticing it.
All right. So this one is interesting because leaving doesn't necessarily mean life suddenly quiets down. Okay. Sometimes we just change what we're listening to.
Yeah. I definitely did this. You know, I went from consuming one kind of information to consuming everything that I could find about what I had just come out of. You know, I'd watched a bunch of videos and podcasts and books and went to Facebook groups and other people's stories. And some of that was incredibly helpful. And I needed that information. You know, I needed to hear other people's experiences and I needed to understand things.
But at some point, you know, you still have somebody talking in your ear all day long. Okay. It's just a different somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean by that line on the slide here. Sometimes the subject changes, but the pattern doesn't. that constant input is still constant input. And if I'm always listening to what everybody else is thinking and about everything, it doesn't leave any room for my own thoughts to wander about. And if we're not listening to what we actually think about things and what we really want, it's more difficult to identify what our values are, where we need to set those boundaries and those types of things. So learning how to be able to be quiet and listen to ourselves is really important.
Yeah, and quiet, it doesn't have to mean sitting silently in a room doing nothing. Okay, it could be driving somewhere without having the radio on. Okay, taking the dogs out and leaving your phone, at home, and just being in your thoughts. Sitting outside with your coffee. What if that looks like for you? Okay, doing something around the house without a video playing in the background. Just having a little space in your day where nothing else is taking your attention.
Yeah, that was one of the things I used to do when I was going through the cancer journey, is that I used to walk a lot. And I would play music as I was walking. And that was where, it's like I had that time and could listen to what was really going on inside of me. And I know that a lot of times when we're first doing that, it can feel strange, because there's, when there's finally some quiet, initially we might get bored because we're not used to listening to ourselves, and your mind actually might wander and start thinking about something completely random. You might even come up with an idea and then you realize there's something that you want. But I actually think that wandering is important, but we also want, we talk a lot about curiosity and experimenting. And so we need that room, for our own thoughts so that they can show up, so that we can be curious about that and what's really important to us.
Exactly. Sometimes turning down the volume is how you finally start hearing what's been underneath it. Okay. And maybe even start recognizing which thoughts are yours, are actually yours, right? And not ones that were input from other people in the past.
Yeah. I know, like on the slide too, it has all that scribble. That's kind of what it can feel like, when we've got constant input, whereas, and so we, sometimes we don't end up being able to gain that clarity if it's like constant. So, and then there's connection. And I think that this is another place where some of us may have to learn something very, very different, because in that high control environment, sometimes disappearing was actually how we protected ourselves. You learned that when you keep something to yourself, you learned which parts of you fit and then which parts didn't. And sometimes staying connected actually meant making sure that the parts that didn't fit weren't seen at all, or even a little bit.
Yeah, and you can get really good at that, huh? You can be sitting right there with everybody else and still be filtering yourself the whole time. Okay. And just because you leave that environment doesn't mean that automatically leaves you.
Yeah, I remember like feeling this way, especially when I was going through the domestic violence situation too. And one of the things, though, I had a really interesting experience on the opposite side of this. For some reason, I kept getting inviting to all these Christian women's network groups. After we got here in Maricopa, and this was not just once, but it was several of them. And I remember thinking, why does the universe keep doing this to me? Like serious. Of all the networking groups that you could keep putting in front of me, why these Christian groups?
Yeah, the universe has a sense of humor.
Apparently. But then something really shifted for me. I realized that maybe there was actually an opportunity here. not an opportunity to actually change what I believe, and not an opportunity where I felt like I had to convince them to change what they believe, but actually an opportunity for me to practice being completely myself in a space where people believe differently than I do. And that has been really, really interesting. I get to know these women, and I can appreciate them, and I can hear about what matters to them, and they can get to know me. And I don't have to accept their beliefs in order to accept them. And I don't have to accept, and they don't have to accept my beliefs in order for them to accept me. And that was one of the things that I observed. And especially coming out of the environment that we did, this felt really, really odd at first. But as I really got curious about it and really started meeting these people, it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, and that's really a different type of connection, okay? Because nobody has to disappear for the relationship to work. Okay, you can be authentic, and believe it or not, we can learn how to do that. Okay, we can stand in the same space with somebody who sees the world very differently than we do. Okay, and still have curiosity about each other. We can still laugh together. We can still find things that we have in common. We can appreciate each other, and we can just go home as ourselves. And for me, that's been a really interesting part of rebuilding. Because I don't want belonging anymore if the price of belonging is disappearing. Okay, and connection doesn't have to mean that we live in an echo chamber or agree with everything what somebody's saying.
Yeah, it kind of actually reminds me of when your uncle, when it was becoming more apparent, that we were sharing more things, and when your uncle told you that you needed to go throw yourself at the feet of the elders and beg for forgiveness. It's like, that's one of those things where it's like, oh, I can't be myself, and I think, that was a big one for me to learn too. The connection doesn't require sameness. We can have differences and still have respect and appreciate somebody without adopting their worldview. And we can allow somebody to know who we actually are without automatically assuming that different means the connection has to end. That to me feels a whole lot more like belonging without disappearing.
He's being a little rambunctious there.
Yeah, they are. They're
Okay.
being a little bit. Sorry about that. Sorry about the background noise.
That's real life in action, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Linda. She said that she's impressed by me taking up their invitation. It's been really cool.
All right. So now the slide here, after talking about everything that we've said, the rest, movement, food, quiet, connection, right? This is probably where some of us could get ourselves into trouble. We could turn around tomorrow and decide, okay, new life. I'm getting up at 6. Okay. I'm walking every morning. I'm eating perfectly, some may say. I'm going outside. I'm meditating. I'm calling friends. I'm going to bed at 10. Whatever that looks like for you.
And then by Wednesday, we're exhausted from taking care of ourselves.
Right. Exactly. And then we decide we failed after just a few days or a week.
Sorry about that. They're being a little rambunctious. So, I really don't want that to be what everybody takes away from tonight either. Because it's not about creating another list, that we're supposed to be doing something. And, this is where that rhythm over perfection really matters. That rhythm, it is something that starts becoming a part of how we live. Maybe you notice that getting outside in the morning really does help. Getting in that sunlight in the first thing in the morning, and you start doing it more often because you enjoy the after effects. Or you put your phone away earlier and you find that it actually helps you sleep. Or you like walking after dinner, or Friday night actually becomes the night that you do absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to happen every single time for it to matter. You miss the walk, you stay up late, you have a crazy week, you get out of whatever rhythm that you had going, you just come back to it.
Yeah. And I absolutely love this because it leaves room for life. And this isn't about building that perfect routine. It's about starting to recognize some of those things that support you and letting a few of them become part of your life.
Yeah. Not 10 of them at once either.
Definitely not 10. And that's really the invitation for this week. Just one thing. Not the thing that you think that you should be choosing or the thing that sounds the most impressive. Just one thing that you want to give a little bit more attention to.
Yeah. And I think that last part matters because this isn't about looking at everything that we've talked about tonight and deciding where you're doing the worst.
Yeah, please don't do that. This isn't, well, apparently my sleep is terrible. I don't exercise enough. I need more friends. I should go out more, go outside more. No, these pictures, they're just pieces of somebody's life. Cooking, moving, being outside, being with people, creating something, resting, and yours might be something completely different.
Maybe there's something you've been missing, something that you used to enjoy or something you've been wanting to try and just haven't yet. Maybe it's something that you noticed, tonight and you just haven't been giving much room to or attention.
Yeah. So now I want to bring back that idea of curiosity and experimenting from the beginning of our discussion, because we're not asking you to establish all these new habits this week. We're just saying, give something a little more room and see what happens. Maybe you decide you're going to get outside more and discover, that you really do feel better, or, make some plans with somebody and realize how much that you've missed having people around. And I do have something in the works of being able to do some fun things online with somebody, a thing that is no cost, probably within maybe the next month or so, that we'll put out here that people can give a try as well. And it might be something too, you might give yourself an evening to do absolutely nothing and discover, apparently I needed that.
Hey, or maybe you just try something that doesn't do much for you. See, that's useful too. That's information, that you take in, you just realize what works and what doesn't.
What were you saying? Sorry.
I said,
two noisy dogs.
I said, maybe you try something new and it doesn't work for you, then that's useful as well because that's information.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Above all, we're learning about ourselves, and we're learning something that's much bigger than whether we like taking walks or whether we like cooking or whether we like having those quiet moments. What we're learning here, believe it or not, is learning to pay attention to ourselves. And that is a huge key. And when we're doing something that we may not have done very often before, we're actually letting what we learn about ourselves have some influence over how we live.
Yeah, that's a very different way of building a life, okay? And it doesn't happen all at once either, okay? It happens in these little choices where we start saying things like, this matters to me, and I'm going to make some room for it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done a lot of talking now, and we'd love to hear from you guys. I'm really curious about if this brought anything up for you. You know, maybe there's something that you realize that you've been overlooking, or maybe you recognize one of those places where you still push yourself through. Would love to hear it. I need to get the invite button. So let me add that.
Just remember, you certainly don't have to have anything figured out before you come up here either, and participate. It's just a conversation. You can disagree with something we said. You can add something we completely missed. Any ideas, any questions? You can tell us what this looked like for you.
Yep.
Any aha moments?
Yeah,
anything at all.
Because we learn too. We learn from these conversations, and if something's been bouncing around in your head, we'd love to have you share with it. We'd love to hear what you've been thinking. But until somebody clicks on it, we're gonna go ahead. But feel free the button. Oh, we've got Linda. I'm gonna add Linda.
Okay. Hi, Linda.
Hello. This was really good tonight. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're saying
Thank you.
that
Appreciate
this
it.
is an opportunity to pay attention to what's going on in our bodies and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can make our decisions based on what we have found to be helpful or not helpful. What I have found is that when we're in a high control situation or an abusive relationship, basically the decisions we choose to make are in the best interest of the abuser, okay?
Mhm.
Because that makes sense. So if we are living a life now that we're going to make decisions in the best interest of ourselves, that's going to be quite foreign, quite strange, and a bit awkward. So that shift,
Yeah.
like John was saying, it's not going to happen right away, but getting to know the things that we're interested in, choices we're going to want to make, is a new avenue for us. And discovering those things were what we put to the side, or we were told to put to the side in order to be a good servant of God. So some of us, we're going to be discovering it for the first time. Some
Yeah.
people will go back to something they were already familiar with. But getting to live a life when you're making choices that are in your best interest is what I see that this is about. And that equals liberty and freedom to me. And getting to be your authentic self, which we can't be if we're in an abusive relationship or in a high control group.
Yeah. How does that make you feel with that thought?
I love it. I love it, but it's also quite awkward and foreign too, so that's normal too. And it can be scary, I can remember when stuff like this was scary. And I can also remember talking to people and hearing them say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I realized, I'm asking them what I should do. Why would I be asking these people what I should do? Because that's what I was used to. People telling me what I should do, not me focusing in on myself and coming up with my own decision of what I should do.
Yeah.
It's a shift.
It definitely is a shift. But it can be so cool. It can be so cool
Absolutely.
to actually experience joy when so for example, if I use you as an example, because you said you didn't get out in the sunshine enough. You think that you need to get out there more often. But if you got out there more often and actually truly experience joy with that in a different way than you've ever had before, how cool is that?
Yeah. I have a pool. I live in apartments. I have a
Mm-hmm.
pool like just outside my door. And I'm hearing kids playing in it right now. I actually bought myself a bathing suit, so I'm going to go out there. Like I have every intention to get out in the sun.
Awesome.
And
Yes.
it's going to be for my best interest, even though, we're going through a heat wave. So I'm going to wait till later.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
do see the benefit of the vitamin D and all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I
Yeah.
can't wait to hear about you, about what it what it's like, what you experienced, and what it did for you. What did you
Yeah.
notice?
Me too. I'm
You know,
looking
I
John,
think
forward to telling you that too.
oh, good, yeah. And John Marsden says he's gonna go to his backyard next. So I love that. I love it.
All
I
right,
love it. I
John.
love it.
you know, there's a
You
point I
know,
wanted to make.
John does some gardening and stuff. His yard's pretty
Mm.
cool. He's shown some pictures. But John, um, the John that's with Shannon, what did you want to say?
Oh, the point I wanted to make about tonight is about the content that we're talking about that we haven't said is that I think it's human nature to always wonder what other people need and not what we need. People, whether it's your coworkers or your spouse, your kids, your family. So people work themselves to the bone to make other people happy, give them what they need, but they're not. And when you do that, you're not focusing on what you need. You're not able to give them, those people that you love, your best self. You know, and there's a reason why the airlines will tell you to put your mask on first, because if you're not healthy, you can't help anyone else. Yeah,
That is so true. Yes,
yeah,
that is so true. We cannot be any good to anybody else unless we're good to ourselves first,
yeah,
which is also a foreign concept.
yeah.
But I'm enjoying doing this now. I mean, there are certain situations where you know your kids might be little, and yes, they take up more of your day and your responsibilities. You might have a spouse that's injured, and they might take up more of more than you're used to. But then there's going to be time, like myself, when I've got all this time. It's pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's fun to make choices
Well, I
that are
can't
in
wait
my
to hear.
best interest. But
Yeah, I can't
that
wait
used
to
to be
hear.
labeled outright selfish.
I love it.
Thank
I
you.
love it.
I will.
All
I
right.
will be telling you. Okay, that's it.
All right. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate you.
All righty.
Okay, now, and if you don't want to, so nobody else wants to come up tonight, or you think of something after that we've moved on, which happens to me all the time. Just we're gonna keep this conversation going tomorrow.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I really love about the breakouts. We introduce the ideas on Deservingly You, and then we actually sit down together and hear about what it might look like in your life. And so here are the 5 questions that we're going to be covering tomorrow night.
And we're gonna talk about what makes it hard to care for ourselves, even when we know what we need. Okay. And how we recognize when we've started overriding ourselves again. And what happens when we finally, create some quiet. What connection looks like when we don't have to disappear inside of it.
Yep, definitely. So I think we're going to have some really good conversation around these, especially because none of us is going to have the same answer. That's kind of the cool part about it. And what might feel restful to me is absolutely crazy to John.
Pretty good chance of that.
So we learn about what works for us. We also get ideas from other people when we have these conversations. Doing breakouts like this is exactly what John and I did for our journey and our healing journey, and helped us to be able to understand ourselves better so that we could build a stronger foundation that we could go forward. So please, feel free to come join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We would love to have you there. You can find us. You can find the Exit Generation Rebuilding After High Control Systems in Facebook. It's a Facebook group. You can find us. You can join the group and join the conversation. So next week we're going to be building directly on what we started tonight. Because once you start paying attention to what supports you, the things that you enjoy, what you want more of, and what actually feels like you when you start getting to know you, something else can start happening. You start getting a clearer picture of who you are now.
Right. Not just who you think you are or who you say you are, but who you actually are becoming through the choices that you make every day.
And I think that distinction is really, really interesting. I can say that I value connection, but then what does connection really look like in my actual life? And I did hear Linda talk about freedom, and we can say that we value freedom, but what am I doing with that freedom? And I can, make the comment too that I value authenticity. But where does that show up in how we live? Because eventually our values have to come off the page and actually become something that we can actually see ourselves doing. And it can help, those values too really, really can help us as we set boundaries to protect ourselves, as well as, even being able to stop people from hurting us as much.
And that's where we're going next week. Okay, we're going to take one value that matters to you and start turning it into something real. Okay, not 10 values, not a whole new identity. One value. Okay, one value, two behaviors.
Yeah, maybe figuring out who you are now isn't something that you do by sitting around trying to define yourself, and this is what I found, like, once again, I'm bringing the cancer journey, was part of it was living some of those answers. And so I think that this is going to be a really interesting conversation next week.
Indeed.
I think this really brings us back also to where we started tonight. When we talk about building a self-trusting, self-led life, it can sound huge. And eventually, there's going to be some really big choices, but self-trust also gets built in much quieter moments. I noticed I'm tired and I stopped treating that like it's something to overcome, or I discover that something brings me joy and I let myself have more of that. Or recognizing, that I need that quiet instead of feeling like I need to immediately fill that space.
Yeah. And every one of those moments, is a chance to practice listening to yourself instead of automatically overriding yourself. Okay. And I think that's what I want to carry from tonight. We're not tending these things because we're trying to become better at healing. We're tending them because there is a life on the other side of all this that we actually get to live. Okay? And the more we learn to hear ourselves, care for ourselves, and trust what we're learning about ourselves, the more life starts to become ours. Okay? And maybe that's why the basics were never really basic at all.
Yeah. There's some of the first places that we actually get to practice leading our own lives. And I think that the line that we choose for tonight says it, that we chose for tonight says it beautifully. A self-trusting, self-led life begins with the basics. Learning to listen to what we need, tending what supports us and making choices that lead us toward the life that we deserve.
And that's where we're going to leave it for tonight. Hopefully not with 10 more things you think you need to work on. Okay. Like we said before.
Yeah, no. Please do not do that. And, if that's what we did, we completely missed the point. So hopefully you didn't take that away with us.
Yeah. Just one thing. Okay. A little curiosity, a little experimenting, and maybe a little more attention to yourself than you give yourself, than what you gave yourself yesterday.
Yeah. And we'd love to have these conversations with you. Please keep watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to Deservingly You so that you can find us again next week. And, hit the little bell, put the thumbs up, all of that fun jazz that John usually says that he's much better at. And if you're looking for more than the show, please come find us on Exit Generation. That's where the conversations continue, including our breakout tomorrow, and where we're building a community around this part of the journey. Not just getting out. We want to learn how to live,
Wherever you are in your journey, thank you for spending your Sunday with us. We appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care of yourself this week. Pay attention to what makes your life feel a little bit more like yourselves. And we're going to see you next time on Deservingly You. So with that, thank you. Thanks again for spending Sunday with us. We really appreciate you being here.
See you next time. Take care.
Yep. Be curious, experiment, and give one thing a little bit more attention this week.